Sometimes, these seemingly inconspicuous clues are endowed with immense power. Presented together, they can recreate the crime scene, narrate the story of what happened, and deliver the culprit into the hands of justice. But if hidden, they can serve evil, slander, fuel harassment, or take someone's life. Fort Collins, Colorado, February 11, 1987. Around 7 in the morning, a frightened bicyclist called the police to report something suspicious in the middle of a field. He initially thought it was a mannequin, but given his location and posture, decided it was worth the police's attention. The arriving officers soon confirmed a much more gruesome reality. The mysterious figure turned out to be the partially unclothed body of 37-year-old local resident Peggy Hettrick. Peggy had clearly been dragged to the spot where she was found, as there was a long trail of blood leading from the road. Her face bore scratches, as if someone had held her at knife point. The knife also became the murder weapon. Peggy suffered a precise strike from behind, severing a major artery, leading to her rapid blood loss. Blood was found on the sidewalk, but it's unclear whether she was attacked on the road or pulled from a vehicle and then moved to the field. The perpetrator removed a portion of the woman's chest. Subsequent autopsy revealed that Peggy had undergone female genital mutilation, a fact that horrified the investigators. Murders involving this kind of post-mortem mutilation make up less than 1% of all cases, making it an extremely rare occurrence for any police department, especially in a small town. In their haste to solve the case, the police compiled an initial list of suspects, with Peggy's on- and off boyfriend, Matt Zollner, taking the top spot. According to accounts from the victim's family and friends, Matt was inclined to end the relationship for good, while Peggy was not ready for that. Matt was one of the last people to see her alive. She encountered the man in a bar parking lot, where she went after work. She was visibly upset to find him in the company of another woman, and they had an argument. Nevertheless, Matt offered to give Peggy a ride home, but she declined and left the establishment on her own. There was no direct evidence linking him to the murder, and he had an alibi, albeit not the most solid one. His girlfriend claimed that he had spent the entire night with her. Who else could have had a motive for the murder? Investigators also took note of the location where the body was found. Peggy was dragged across the field perpendicular to the road before being turned. There were more discreet places to conceal the body, so why did the perpetrator choose to leave Peggy in such a conspicuous spot? Was it to watch from the window of their home? Several houses were directly across the field, with the closest one belonging to widower Clyde Masters. His wife had passed away 4 years earlier when their son, Timothy Lee Tim Masters, was just 11 years old. Clyde recounted that on the morning of the incident, he woke up his son as usual, prepared breakfast, and saw him walk out the back door toward the school bus. Normally, Tim would quickly cross the field to cut his route short, but on that day, he hesitated for a few seconds. Detective Linda Wheeler Holloway realized that Tim must have seen the body but did not report it. Suddenly, the quiet, introverted 15-year-old boy became the prime suspect in the case. The teenager was taken out of school for questioning. He explained that as he walked across the field, he initially thought he had seen someone had discarded trash in the distance. As he got closer, he thought it might be a first aid dummy, perhaps a foolish prank. The figure had exposed parts, with hair pulled back, and it could easily be mistaken for a woman's body. Tim admitted that, while on the bus, he had some doubts about whether it might be a real body. Nevertheless, he did not report it. The cyclist who alerted the police also initially thought it might be a mannequin, but for some reason, the police believed him and not Tim. The boy was sent home, but the next day, he was invited to the police station for questioning. The police officers requested to speak to Tim without his father present, and they interrogated the teenager for 10 hours. At the same time, Detective Jim Broderick searched the Masters' home. On Tim's bedroom closet, he found a collection of knives. Of course, they were confiscated. What raised more suspicion were Tim's drawings. Numerous sketches depicted scenes of violence to varying degrees. These findings convinced the detectives that they were dealing with a killer. They put immense pressure on the boy, using various interrogation techniques, but he never wavered and did not confess to anything except not reporting the body. He remained consistent in his story and did not lose his temper. Tim explained that he collected cheap knives, influenced by the popular character Rambo from the 1980s. Upon learning that someone had been murdered right across from his home, he got scared and, after the school questioning, placed the knives on his closet for self-defense. As for the drawings, It was a way to gain attention from his classmates, and the more they praised his work, the more he enjoyed creating them. Detectives were divided in their opinions. The professionals who interrogated the boy were convinced that he was not the murderer. They released him. However, the police did not leave him in peace. They spoke to his teachers and classmates, openly informing them that Tim was a suspect. Nearly all of Tim's friends turned their backs on him. The police investigated all the knives, clothing, and even the home's sewage system, but they found not a drop of blood that would connect Tim to Peggy. The investigation came to a standstill. Weeks and months passed, but the case remained stagnant. As Peggy was killed almost exactly 4 years after Tim's mother died, the police believed that he committed the murder out of anger over losing his mother. Therefore, a year after Peggy's murder, they began surveilling him. They also kept an eye on his house and even Peggy's grave, hoping that he would visit there. However, all they found out during that week was that Tim woke up early in the morning, went to school, played video games after school, did his homework, and went to bed. So the police convinced a local newspaper reporter to write a story about an imminent arrest. The final straw in the harassment of the teenager was a copy of his mother's obituary, which the detectives left on the windshield of his friend's car. Despite all of this, Tim continued to live his life, believing that soon everyone would realize it was a big mistake. Unfortunately, he didn't account for one very persistent police officer. 4 years later, at the Fort Collins police station, there was renewed interest in old cases. Linda reviewed the materials of Peggy's murder once again and noticed a crucial detail that the police had missed before. She learned from Tim's friend that he knew Peggy had a part of her breast severed or bitten off. The police had kept this fact secret, so Linda believed she had grounds for an arrest. In July 1992, Linda located the now 20-year-old Tim in Philadelphia, where he was serving in the Navy. The young man had received a promotion, was living his life, and was confident that he had left that story behind. He calmly told Linda that the big secret of the police was never a secret to anyone, because officers had involved Boy Scouts in searching the field, telling them they were looking for a part of a woman's breast. One of the Girl Scouts involved in the search went to school with Tim, sat next to him in class, and told him about it. When she confirmed this, Linda realized that the young man was most likely innocent. She wanted to restart the investigation from scratch and seek FBI assistance, but she was prohibited from contacting the Bureau. Linda closed the case in 1993 and left the Fort Collins Police Department 2 years later. When she left, Jim Broderick warned her that he would reopen Peggy's case, focusing on his favorite suspect once again. On August 10, 1998, Tim Masters woke up to a knock on the door. He didn't recognize Broderick when he announced that Tim was under arrest. The police had absolutely no new evidence. No DNA, no hairs, no fingerprints, no confessions to a fellow service member, nothing. Nonetheless, in February 1999, the man stood before a judge. Even the prosecutors were convinced that they couldn't prove Tim's guilt, but Broderick convinced them otherwise. They built the entire case on the teenager's drawings and invited psychologist Reed Malloy to analyze them. The expert never met Tim in person, but claimed that out of all possible suspects, Tim had to be the killer. 2 of the boy's drawings particularly interested him. In one, a person drags another by the armpits, and in the other, a knife appears to penetrate something. Tim explained that he drew one of them after he saw the body. The other had nothing to do with stabbing a person, but was more of an attempt to create a 3D image of a knife going through paper. However, Malloy pressured the jury with his expert opinion, showing them the drawings and assuring them that Tim was capable of violence. The prosecutors reinforced this by telling the jury that no one else had a motive, opportunity, or weapon. Tim's changed appearance worked in their favor. The jurors didn't see the skinny, frail teenager who could hardly drag a woman's body across a field. They saw a sturdy man. In the end, even though there was not a single piece of physical evidence against the defendant, on March 26, 1999, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The wrongful conviction of Tim Masters weighed heavily on Detective Linda. She couldn't shake the thought that an innocent person was in prison and she didn't know what to do. She decided to review the case materials and was horrified to find that many crucial pieces of evidence were missing. When she asked why he hadn't turned over all the evidence to the prosecutors, Jim Broderick responded that it was up to him to decide what to give them. He focused extensively on the shoe prints found at the scene, even though Tim had admitted to walking through the field. However, he ignored other tracks, particularly the footprints of Tom McCann, leading away from the body. These were adult-sized shoes, not the kind worn by teenagers, and they were never presented in court. There were other facts deliberately concealed from the court, including expert opinions suggesting Tim's innocence. First, there was Broderick's interview with an FBI profiler who questioned the significance of Tim's drawings. The profiler believed they were just typical teenage comics unrelated to Peggy's murder. Second, the removal of part of Peggy's breast and the female circumcision were two surgical procedures that required expertise. It was hard to imagine a 15-year-old teenager with no surgical experience performing these operations in the middle of a field with only a flashlight or a lighter. Among the concealed evidence was also a perfect alternative suspect in Peggy's murder. The revelation about Dr. Richard Hammond's voyeurism activities added a new layer of complexity to the case. In 1995, he was arrested when a student he had hired to watch his house discovered hidden cameras in the guest bathroom. Dr. Hammond had placed several cameras that would activate when the light in the room was turned on. These cameras were pointed at the most intimate parts of a woman's body. To identify who was caught on video, he set up a roll of paper so that the camera would capture the face of the person reaching for it. The film rolls were continuously replaced, and even when Dr. Hammond was out of town, he didn't miss anything. He collected secret video collections of his daughter's school friends, family friends, relatives, and visitors over the course of months. One of the detectives conducting a search in Hammond's house called Jim Broderick and informed him about a possible connection to Peggy's case, but Broderick paid no attention to it and even refused to examine the evidence. And there was plenty to examine. Dr. Hammond lived right across from the field where Peggy was found, and this location was visible from his house. He wore Tom McCann shoes. He was a surgeon, which meant he could have performed surgery on the victim's body. Lastly, he was a voyeur, fixated on the most intimate parts of the female body, right across from the house where a murdered woman was discovered, missing precisely those parts. However, Broderick dismissed this lead and didn't even want to review the evidence. However, if Peggy appeared on Hammond's tapes, no one would ever know. Dr. Hammond was arrested, spent a few days in a psychiatric facility, and was released on bail. He immediately went to a hotel in Denver and injected himself with cyanide. Within 5 months of Hammond's death, all the tapes were destroyed. What's crucial is that during Tim's trial, neither the defense nor the prosecutors knew about this, and they built the case on the assumption that no one else could have committed the murder. Tim Masters' legal team, armed with new information and conducting their experiments, presented their version of what could have happened on that day. According to their theory, Peggy was abducted in her car with a knife held to her cheek as she exited the bar. She was then forced into the car, but she didn't give in to fear. She opened the door and attempted to jump out of the moving vehicle, which would explain the scuffs on the sole of her right shoe when she pulled her foot from the moving car. Furthermore, the knife wound holes on Peggy's body, blouse, and coat align only when you twist them as if someone were pulling her into a car. Perhaps after this, the killers took Peggy to a well-lit location where they could perform surgeries on the most delicate parts of her body. Then they transported her to the field. Importantly, there were no marks on the ground from dragging the body, and there was no dirt or grass on Peggy's clothing. According to experiments conducted by the defense, this scenario could only have occurred if 2 people were involved. If everything happened as the defense believes, Tim's drawing, which was a key piece of evidence in his first trial, doesn't appear as compelling. But despite the huge number of hidden evidences from the court, Tim's defenders were not sure if this would be sufficient to overturn the guilty verdict. That's why they turned their attention to DNA. They were willing to go to great lengths and take risks to uncover the truth. Linda reached out to experts from the Netherlands who used the most advanced DNA detection methods at the crime scene. They were particularly interested in skin cells that remain on clothing when someone applies force to tear or pull it from another person. They found several samples of unknown male DNA on her clothing, but what intrigued them even more were the skin cells on the inside of her underwear and on the cuffs of Peggy's blouse. In these locations, DNA cannot accidentally end up, and whoever it belonged to needed to provide some explanations. Was it Tim Masters' DNA? No. Dr. Hammond's? No, it turned out to be the DNA of Matt Zollner, Peggy's ex-boyfriend, the last person who had seen her alive and had an argument with her on the evening of the murder. Discovering all of this evidence, Tim's defenders had no doubt that they would be allowed to hold a new trial for Tim. However, the prosecutor took an unexpected and bold step. requesting the court to immediately release Tim without a trial. Tim was released on January 22, 2008. His charges were dropped, although officially he is still considered a suspect in Peggy's murder. Matt Zollner was never charged in connection with the murder. He continues to lead a relatively calm life in Fort Collins. Jim Broderick was charged with perjury in 2010, and in 2013, all charges against him were dropped. Prosecutors in Tim's trial were reprimanded and fined for not disclosing all the available information to the defense, although they were later promoted to judges. Tim spent almost 10 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. It's not surprising that he now highly values outdoor walks and admits that he's afraid to fully enjoy life because he deeply fears losing it again. Tom Hettrick, Peggy's brother, who had long doubted that Tim was the killer, received the news of his release with joy. However, he wants everyone to understand that not everything is over. Peggy is the real victim in this story. Tim has returned home, but Peggy never will. Her family and friends never found out who took their intelligent, trusting, charmingly eccentric, and very independent daughter, sister, and friend. The murder that shocked the town over 20 years ago remains as much of a mystery today as it was then. The question remains open today. Who killed Peggy Hettrick? Was it Matt Zollner, Richard Hammond, or someone who never came to the attention of the police, but was in the right place at the right time? Perhaps Peggy simply crossed paths with a stranger who noticed her and decided she would be his victim.